You are listening to Gangland Wire, hosted by former Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit Detective Gary Jenkins.
Welcome, all you wiretappers. All you guys out there. Happy to be back here in the studio, and we are talking halfway around the world today through the magic of the internet and Zoom. I have on here Keith Bulfin. Did I pronounce that right, Keith?
You have indeed.
All right, good. So I happen to listen to another podcast, and I can't even remember the name of it now, but I don't mind giving the competition a little help, but I can't remember it. And he had such a compelling story that I immediately started trying to get hold of him because I wanted to hear this story. Did a little research on him. He grew up in New Zealand, as you can tell by the accent. And I don't know, Keith, is there a difference in a New Zealand accent and an Australian accent? They sound the same to me, but.
Yes, there is a difference. New Zealanders are a little bit different to Australians in terms, probably like the Canadians to the Americans.
Right, or even Southern Americans to Midwest Americans like myself and Northern and Eastern Americans. So
yes, exactly.
But, kind of get this started, folks. Keith was involved in kind of a bad casino deal. I believe he was an accountant. Is that right? A banker, an accountant when you were young?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
And you ended up, and however this casino deal went askew and some bad people were involved in, you ended up getting 3 years in penitentiary. And for some reason, even though this is a white collar crime, you were sent to the maximum security prison at Port Phillips. And in that facility, he linked up with a Mexican cartel banker named David Gomez. Now, his book, Teresa, go back to before the book. That's from my editor. Now Keith's book, Undercover, A Novel of Life, will recount how he went into the cocaine business and take you on a trip of just how that cocaine business works on the inside. It was described a chilling memoir that keep the readers turning pages after pages just to see what happens next. So I look forward to reading it myself, Keith. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, great. Hold the book up so people can see what the cover looks like.
Absolutely.
There it is, Undercover, A Novel of Life. Keith Bulfin. So let's tell me a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about that penitentiary experience. We really want to know about the cocaine business in the United States, of course, but tell us a little bit about that penitentiary life. How did you navigate that?
Well, it's extremely difficult because I was in a unit which was 20 inmates in that unit and 17 never to be released. They were mass murderers and they were in for life. And there was 3 bankers, myself and 2 Mexicans. But to live with these people, if you look at the wrong way, they would stab you or punch you or fight with you all the time. So every day was a struggle to survive within the unit. But being an old rugby player, I could take a few knocks and give a few knocks back. So, but I got stabbed a couple of times and beaten up a few times, but that was the phase of life. And it was a difficult environment, but we survived.
So then this David Gomez, who was a Mexican cartel banker, was in that unit, I assume, with you. Is that correct?
Correct. So he was he had come to Australia under a false passport, and he had been living under a false name, and he'd been under surveillance by the federal police and the state police, as well as the FBI and the DEA from the United States. As he was the major banker for the drug cartels in Mexico and Colombia. And he had fled Mexico after Fox was appointed president. and he lost all his protection, and he had fled and been a fugitive for over 4 years when he was captured in Melbourne. And he was living a luxurious life, pretending to be a coffee importer. But everybody was watching him from the federal police, the FBI, and the DEA. And then because I had become a friend of his within the prison system, they saw this as an opportunity that maybe that friendship could lead to myself becoming the next banker for the drug cartels in Mexico and Colombia. So I was interviewed by the DEA and also by federal police to see whether, in fact, I could build on the friendship within the prison system. Now, Gomez himself, because he had so much money, he had protection within the prison system. So one thing, by befriending him, gave me protection. So the beatings and the stabbings didn't continue. So that was a plus. But my knowledge of drug cartels in Mexico and Colombia was zilch. I mean, the only thing I had seen was the film Traffic. I'd never seen anything else. And I hadn't read up about them. So I was quite naive. And but he and I got on extremely well because we're both bankers. We're both interested in, the economy and how to move money around the world. And he thought I was very good, probably as good as he was, in terms of where you could plant money and how you could transfer it, how you could set up nominee companies. And unbeknownst to me, he was talking to his lawyers he would ring from the prison to his lawyers who would connect his phone to Mexico. And he was speaking very highly of me, talking about I could be the next creative banker. And from the cartel's perspective, I was the right person because I didn't come from America or Central or South America. I came from a different country. I was coming out of a prison system, so that was a plus for them. And Gomez had built a trust with me. And trust is terribly important within the cartels. If you can be trusted, then, you can survive. And the cartels work on fear. So when they meet you, if you're trembling and perspiring and they can smell the fear, they say to you in Spanish, but also in English, if we smell fear, we smell trust. We can trust you.
Interesting.
So that was an interesting, and I didn't have to act that part.
You didn't have to act like you were afraid of them. I understand, man. I'd be scared of them too. Whew. They not only kill you in maybe even a slow, horrible manner, but they kill all your family too. They do not play by the rules like the American mafia does.
No. But the most important thing from the cartel's perspective is that they control the cocaine market globally. And that's a huge business. And what they do, the United States is a lucrative market for them. Yeah. They ship the cocaine across the border, but they also ship the cocaine down to Brazil and from Brazil across to Africa and into Europe, as well as into Australia and Southeast Asia. But the business has grown, and according to the US Department of Justice, the income that these 5 families earn is $500 billion. It's close, just on 480 billion a year. And so these guys that run these cartels, they've got 5,000 or 6,000 people working within the organizations, but they have experts who are financial whiz-kids who look after their money and transfer their money around the world. And I became one of them. So, I became the banker for the cartels. But being an undercover agent for the DEA, that's the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Yeah. Now how did that work? I mean, did they help you get out of prison, or were you able to? You have to stay there. You did your time, and then had a mandatory release, or a certain time you were now normally when you got out. Were you normally scheduled to get out, or did they help you with that?
No, they helped. I got out on time, and my date of release, but they were also pushing for me to get released as soon as possible. And then as soon as I was released, I was virtually on an aircraft to San Diego. And then I set up a covert banking operation. But the DEA had already established a company in the British Virgin Islands. We also set up an office in Bethesda not Bethesda, in San Diego, in La Jolla. Mm-hmm. And then I flew to Mexico to carry out the banking operations because Gomez had been transferred back. And my test was the very first transaction. I mean, Gomez had given me instructions when I flew into Mexico to have the charges dropped against him so that when he was extradited back to Mexico, he could be a free man. So that was an interesting scenario because here I am completely naive of what's going on in Mexico. Arrive on an aircraft and met by Gomez's people, which are 3 cars with armored, personnel. And then I met one of his finance guys who said my role was to finalize a transaction with the judge who was in charge of his case. And the judge was actually in a penthouse in Acapulco with his mistress.
What kind of money does that take for Gomez to fix a case like that?
30 million.
Oh,
15 million up front and 15 million when the case was dropped.
God. Oh man, I might fix a case myself for $30 million. I'm sorry, folks. I know I'm Mr. Dudley Do Right in many ways, but boy, 30 million oh my God. Go ahead. That blows my mind away. Well, another question is during this time now, the DEA, you had really clandestine meetings with probably 1 or 2 agents only. And then they just turned you loose because they couldn't take the chance of you being seen with anybody or that might be identified as an agent.
That is correct. Okay. And that is absolutely correct. I mean, and also the fear was within the DEA, there are a lot of moles who work for the drug cartels.
Oh, when you got $30 million to throw around, you could buy a DEA agent for probably $5 million. No offense, DEA, my DEA friends, but you could buy a lot of influence for a few $1 million in that culture.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So the hierarchy within the DEA were concerned about, the possibility of a mole. And they said to me, we don't know who a mole would be. It's very difficult. So I had an Afro-American girl who was my controller and then a supervisor and the regional director. So they were very cautious about where we met, how I met. And so often we meet at a Starbucks coffee shop and have a meeting there, or even go for a walk in the park. But we would have 2 agents in the car who would be making sure we weren't followed and no one was listening to our conversation or anything like that. Yeah. I mean, it was a very important operation, to try and because I was the key to their financial operations. And the thing is, from the DEA's perspective and also from the US government's perspective, was how they dealt with their money. Where did the money go? What did they buy? What was their interest? And what influence did they have? And we knew they had congressmen and senators and policemen and border patrol and FBI agents and DEA on the payroll. Mm-hmm. But who were they? And how many of them were there?
And how did that work? For example, did did somebody get the money and then parcel it out to other people who then paid it to the different people, or, there wasn't one person that paid everybody, I'm sure, but, how did that work? I'm sure that's what the DEA wanted to know.
Oh, absolutely. I think in terms of, I didn't get to gather that information in regard to the US, but I got to be a paymaster to certain politicians and people in the army and the police, but mainly in Central and South America, like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, but also across the border down in Belize and Panama and Venezuela. But in terms of the US, that was very guarded by one person. Mm-hmm. And that was a list that the DEA were after. Also, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Assistant Attorney General in the United States was really after that list. If somehow we could get that, then we would, they would be able to, that would be vital information.
Yeah.
But the other thing we wanted to know was, and my role was to convince the cartels to use me to manage their money. And so rather than just launder their funds, in other words, just launder it through and put it into their bank accounts, my role was to convince them that I could manage their funds, and I was able to do that. So when I say manage their funds, I started to invest their money, invest their surplus cash into real estate, particularly in Florida and New York. But we also bought shares, blue chip shares on the stock exchange, and we also bought art. So, and the object was so that when the time came for the US Department of Justice to make arrests, they could then seize these assets. Yeah. And one of the other things that we looked at too was because like the mafia had done in the past, they started to use money to buy companies to legitimize their business activities. So, for example, we bought a pharmaceutical company in Chile. So we paid off the debt, bought that pharmaceutical company, and then with the idea of expanding that pharmaceutical company by buying smaller companies in Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and in Bolivia. So we bought small companies and then swallowed them up into the large company. Mm-hmm. And that was the object of expansion, turning dirty money into good money, basically washing it through this operation. And the other aspect was buying in fast food restaurants, particularly pizza parlors, pizza shops, but also into like Roof Steakhouses, Haagen-Dazs ice cream, a Burger King franchise or a McDonald's franchise. So it's a lot of it's cash, so you can buy. Oh, yeah.
And this was all in Mexico and Central America and South America.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious about one thing, Keith, is, I talked to a drug dealer here in Kansas City once back when I was working them. And he said, Sergeant, did you ever see a whole room full of money? And I said, no, I haven't. He said, well, I have. So, we hear about this, and we had some kids that found a house that had about a half a room full of money, and they stole a bunch of it, went out and bought tennis shoes and tracksuits and everything. But so they get all that tens and 20s, fives, tens and 20s down into Mexico. It's just pounds and pounds and pounds of money. And it takes up a huge space. Then how did they then get that to you, I guess?
The one thing about the first time it happened to me was only a small amount of money first. Initially, later I was dealing in millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. But they bring along a case full of $3 million. It would be vacuum packed, so it's all squashed into.
So somebody had already kind of gone through it and maybe got it into bigger bills, maybe hundreds, and vacuum packed it and organized it before you got it.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, I got you now.
And then they would say to you, "Can you launder this money? Can you bank this money?"
Yeah.
And my response would be, "Yes, I can." Yeah. And they would say, well, there's $3 million in this. And you would never dare say to them, I need to count it. because it was exactly right. And then because I banked all their funds in Mexico. So, so it was a call back to DEA, and they would make available a banker who would help me facilitate that transaction.
Okay.
So I would head off to, Bank of America office or a Citibank office and walk in, and after hours, and then the cash would be counted and I would do the transfer.
Okay.
And then, but they would leave you with the cash. And in your own mind, you could never leave Mexico trying to flee with 3 million, and you wouldn't get past the front entrance of the airport.
Yeah.
So, and they would easily track you down.
Yeah, no matter how tempting it was, it wasn't worth it. You needed the government to hide you when this thing was all over. You didn't want to be trying to hide yourself.
No.
And even a government hide you is probably kind of dicey.
Exactly.
God, this is fascinating. A real inside look at how they do that and buying all those businesses. I guess they just you were setting up companies down there in Mexico. Did you set up LLCs and up in the United States? And or I mean, how did they? And then they choose some of their relatives and friends, people they trusted, to sit on the boards and have the higher jobs in these companies.
Yes, they did. And also paid for people to, what they call white knights. So they would pick white knights to be on. But you knew you couldn't do anything wrong. You couldn't cheat the system or try and.
You just had to run the business.
Yeah. And run it successfully.
Yeah.
And sometimes, particularly in the pharmaceutical company, the other subsidiaries that we purchased, they would know that it was drug money, and they would know, they were behind the scenes. So, but it was interesting. And also the ability of these drug cartel people to ring a president in Argentina or Chile or Paraguay to pick up a phone and make a call, say who they are.
Wow.
That happened.
Huh.
I just got that unbelievable connection, but it's all money driven.
Yeah.
So in other words, if you're a president in Argentina and you're going for another election, you need money.
Yeah.
For you, and suddenly money's made available to you. How much do you need to run your election?
Yeah. Plus, you figure when you leave office, you want to have a nice life, and if they take care of business now, why, when they leave office, they're going to have a good life.
Absolutely. And I think there are cases like 60 Minutes in Australia did an interview on the head of police in Tijuana. And he was the highest paid policeman in the Mexico Federal Police. And he had facilities with the US government, and the US government protected his family. So he lived in San Diego and then drove across the border every day and was the head of the police in Tijuana. And the 60 Minutes did a program on him, and he was showing, dead bodies from a cartel head and what arrest rate he was. And then he started to send his family to prestigious schools in San Diego. So the DEA said, well, that doesn't work out. This is his salary. This is what he's earning. And suddenly he's spending more money than he's earning. Something doesn't stack up. So, they then plugged his phones. And of course, then they realized he was, being protected by the Tijuana cartel, and he was earning money from them. So he was immediately arrested. But it was the DEA that did the numbers. The Mexican authorities had no idea.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's just gotten so big. It's bigger than the governments, from what I hear you saying. I already suspicioned that, but it's bigger than any of the governments south of the border.
Yeah, I think there is a way to beat it, but there is a way you could make a serious dent in their operations. And the only way you can beat criminal organization is hit their financial.
Yeah.
If you can upset their financial operations and cut off their money supply, then because drug dealers, they go out in the marketplace, but they make the simple mistakes. They deal in drugs, and then they buy the flash cars, and they got all the flash toys, and a law enforcement officer can work out very quickly, well, this he's either in the drug trade or he's not that smart. So it's just a matter of doing your numbers.
But when they get to that level that you were dealing with, buying whole companies and small businesses and stocks and bonds and real estate, I mean, it'd be almost impossible to. You just hope that they decide they want their kids out of it, and when they die off, then maybe the business will die off. I think. I don't know how else it would ever stop from that level, because they have this constant stream of legitimate cash also.
Yeah, but they can't help themselves. So that's the thing. And it's a greed factor. And so what they say is, we're getting a legitimate business. You have to have, it's like probably some of the mafia families in the past, the ones that get a university education and then they become more sophisticated. Yeah. And then they work out, well, we can leave the drug dealing and the prostitution and the other legal activities and focus on genuine business. And you've seen that in the past, historically, where families have been involved in dirty money and then emerged and become what we call white knights in society. Yeah. But it's the difficulty with drug money, particularly with the families of Mexico, is that the families that run those businesses are basically left school at 14 or 15, are street smart gangsters. They love the thuggery and the beating and the constant fighting until that changes, because the people they employ, to run their operation are the elite in Mexico City. Guys with PhD in finance and one of the ones that I met, he was from Harvard. Gomez went to Harvard, did an MBA at Harvard. Oh. And then you've got the main guy who I met in Mexico City. He went to Columbia University and did a PhD in finance. I mean, he is as sharp as you could possibly imagine. And he's the US government thinks he's worth in excess of 2 or 3 billion in himself, because he's moving the money around. But he's also got protection, He wouldn't want to fly to the US in the short term. He'd be arrested at the airport. But
crazy. So Keith, now that one story about what happened in that hotel, you got to tell that story. This was crazy.
Well, basically, the situation is I was undercover for a long length of time, but one thing I wouldn't do is that I wouldn't tape the conversations. Mm-hmm. And the US Department of Justice wanted the conversations taped because that was further evidence in the case of going to court. But I was reluctant because of the security of these cartels. Is if they find you with a taping device, then, you would be executed on the spot. Mm-hmm. And taping devices can be a pen, just like that. You click the top of the pen, or car keys where you lock the car, but that's actually a recording.
I've heard that in modern times. When I was doing this stuff, they were pretty big, but I've heard in modern times they're just like nothing.
Yeah, and also like this, a phone. Yeah. You can have a phone where you press and then you're recording. So I wouldn't do that. So my schedule was to go to Mexico on the Monday, and on the Sunday, the day before I was scheduled to go to Mexico, they had an agent who had worked in Colombia for 27 years as an undercover agent living in Miami. His name was Al. And I was introduced to him and told, and by the senior executives of the DEA, that under no circumstances was I going to go to Mexico without Al. He was the guy who was going to go down and record all the conversations. The difficulty was Al was an agent. He wasn't a banker, so he didn't understand banking. Yeah. And I tried to teach him within a very short period of time, but he wasn't really interested.
Yeah. And how were you going to explain him also when you got down there?
Well, that was a difficulty as well, because the cartels have trust. So when you introduce a new person in, they become very jittery. Yeah. And if you don't announce it, they become very suspicious. So when we arrived in Mexico, which was on the Monday night, Al disappeared. And it wasn't until later that I realized he disappeared to get a weapon and have a weapon. And my guess is that he went to the US Embassy and caught up with the DEA attaché, was granted a weapon for his own protection. But we had a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning with two bankers for another drug cartel. And how that works is cartels would send a banker along who would understand what you're trying to convince them to use your method of laundering the money. And they would then go back and tell the cartel leader, yeah, this guy's legitimate. He knows what he's talking about. It's a good idea. So when we arrived at the coffee shop, these two bankers were very upset, the fact that I had brought Al along. Yeah, they didn't anticipate him. And they were nervous and they were looking at him with suspicion. And then they decided to ask him a banking question. And they said to me, I don't want you to answer the question, Keith. Let Al answer this.
Test.
So they said to him, what can you tell us about interest arbitrage? And of course, Al had no idea.
Yeah.
And rather than say, look, it's not my expertise, I'll let Keith answer this, he tried to answer it and come up with something which was completely different to what it really was. Yeah. And they said to him, you are not a banker. And at that point, a waiter turned up with a tray of coffee and said to Al in Spanish, would you like some coffee, sir? And he said, no, I don't want any coffee, in Spanish. And they immediately picked up his accent of Colombian. Mm-hmm. So they said, you're not a banker, you're a Colombian. We're suspicious. This meeting's over. Mm-hmm. So there was panic by myself. And admittedly, Al, 27 years undercover, he was petrified. He went into the bathroom, he smashed a tape recorder, and he was like me, desperate to get out of Mexico City because we knew then they were on to us. Mm-hmm. And it was only a matter of time before someone would come for us and then take us away and we would be tortured until such time as the truth had been revealed. But when we contact the DEA in San Diego, and you can imagine a room full of agents and waiting for us to call, and they said, no, you've got to go to the meeting at 2:00 and we'll work out a schedule for you to get back to the US today, but after that meeting. And that meeting was with a major cartel leader who had $10 million in cash. And so we went to the meeting and both were petrified, but we saw all the bodyguards outside. So we knew it was someone important. Mm-hmm. And we went up, and this is the J. Marriott Hotel in Mexico City. So we went up in the lift to the main room where this banker, Mexican banker, who I knew quite well, and I walked in, and he was sitting. It was a suite, so he was sitting at the desk. Mm-hmm. The sunlight coming in over his head, so you were looking into the sun, and because he was sitting at a desk with that window behind him. Yeah. And to the right there was the bedroom with an ensuite, and there was a small lounge where we were. And this banker was extremely upset that I had brought in this Al, but at that time the phone rang, his cell phone rang, and it was the cartel leaders are on their way up in the lift. So he turned to Al and myself and he said, my clients are on their way. And by the way, they're two Colombians, they're brothers. Mm-hmm. And Al immediately realized that he was going to be exposed. 27 years working undercover, everybody knew him.
Yeah, in Colombia, yeah.
So he then immediately went to the bathroom. I thought he'd gone to the bathroom, because he was really upset and he was, but he had gone to the bathroom to get his weapon and take the safety catch off. So when the Colombians come into the room, they greeted me, and I was perspiring like I was just walked out of a shower. Yeah. And then the Colombians heard the toilet flush, and then they swung around to see who was coming out of the bathroom, and then Al come out, but he already had his gun, and he fired. He didn't even, and within, it's less than a second. It felt like less than. It felt like it was 2 minutes, but it was only seconds.
Yeah.
And the Colombians reacted fairly quickly. So there's only one wounded in Colombian and myself left. The rest were dead.
Oh my God.
And then ringing.
What do you do then? What do you do then? Man.
Well, it took me a long time to sort of recover.
When you go out, you got all their bodyguards are downstairs.
Oh yeah, I know. And I'm ringing the DEA and saying, in San Diego, and saying, look, I've got a driver on my head.
There's a song. It has a line that's perfect for this. Send lawyers, guns, and money. The shit has hit the fan.
Absolutely. I said something along those lines.
I bet that's probably what you told that San Diego office.
Yeah. So they said, oh, we'll come up with a plan. But you know,
oh yeah. I think what they really meant was you're on your own, dude. Figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I did everything different to what they said. I
don't blame you.
I do. You know, when they said turn left, I turned right.
Right. Yeah.
But I managed to get myself out of Mexico, and it was an amazing journey how I did that. But you know, you can't outrun the cartels. You know, they and as a result, they come looking for you. So even if you go into witness protection program, they find you in a very short period of time. And as I said in my book, they found us in less than 10 days in a shopping. They picked us up. You see, what happens is they take your photograph and you photograph your family. Yeah. And then they send it out to an Hispanic population in the US. Mm-hmm. So with a reward. So if you know what it's like when you go in America, particularly fast food restaurants, shopping malls, there's a lot of Hispanics, cleaners, people who work your garden, household staff, and particularly in hotels. So, you know, within 10 days, the hit squad had arrived to eliminate us. But, you know, fortunately, the DEA and myself, we stumbled on the fact that they had pinpoint us. So we sought protection in that particular situation. But by the time we're hidden again, this time in New York, but they found us again. Mm-hmm. Then I realized you couldn't outrun them. So I decided to go back to Mexico. So what I did was, I'm very keen on chess. So and when you play chess, you try and work out what the next person's move will be. So in my case, I realized I couldn't trust the agency. There would be someone I couldn't trust. And also realized I couldn't trust the cartels, but I had to have a balance. I have to have insurance. To play this game, I had to have insurance. So what I did was I decided I would protect 3 families in Mexico and give up 2. So if the shit hit the fan, maybe the 3 families who I protected could protect me. Yeah. That was my sort of my thought. So when I went, and also Gomez had been trusted me 3 years in a maximum security unit, and he was back in Mexico. So I flew back to Mexico City. I worked on the assumption there was a 50-50 chance I could be executed. But the Mexicans have a policy, and so the Colombians. If you give yourself up to them, then they will only execute you, not your family. Mm-hmm. If they come after you, then they'll eliminate your extended family, not only you, your family, extended family. But you go to them, it's like, you know, you've come to them. It's a different scenario. So I went to them to convince them that I wasn't a DEA agent because I had protected 3 families. And I had the Colombians' money. I transferred the money out of the DEA's accounts back into a certain account. So I was able to repay the Colombians and get my life back. And I was given semi-protection by the cartels, told never to come back to Mexico, but said that no one will chase you. So from my perspective, so when I wrote the book, I know that no one will touch me.
Oh, that's good. That's great. I just wondered about that now that you've written this book and telling these stories. But you're a long ways away too. It's not like being up in the U.S. as far as having people from Central, South, or Mexico, South America coming after you, being where you are. It's a little bit tougher to get something done over there, I would imagine.
Yeah, but one point is that I was in a shopping mall in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia, and I saw a guy and his wife walking through, and I had to have a second look. And then I realized they were from a cartel family out of Tijuana. I met them in Cabazon Burgers. So I followed them, and they were having an ice cream with their children. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, do I or don't I tell the authorities? And I thought, no. I want to live.
Just leave it alone. Yeah.
Leave it alone.
I understand. Well, I tell you what, Keith, these are some great stories. And that's really all the guys that listen to this podcast, I think, will be really interested in those details about how that money thing works. And it's quite a story. I know I got a guy that I talked to from Kansas City that was running marijuana up here for him. He's in witness protection. I think everybody from that family kind of ended up getting killed or going to the penitentiary over something. So, but he's in witness protection also, and he's lying low. But he told me a story about how a bar owner up here close to Kansas City decided he didn't need to pay the cartel for a couple, 3 loads that he had gotten. They're like 500-pound loads, and it's about $25,000. And he said they sent up 3 carloads, 3 of these big SUVs full of Sicarios, and surrounded this bar that this guy owned. And then one of them went in and said, here's the deal. You get us our money, or you are going to come back and kill everybody in here, kill you, kill your family, burn this place down. And of course, he had the money in about 24 hours.
Yeah, that'll be right.
Yeah, they do not play, do they? So now, Keith, you've got other stories, right? Did you do other work with the DEA? And
no, I was transferred to the FBI.
Or the FBI, you did other things. Can we get back together one of these days and talk about some of that work? That would be great. All right. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. Hold the book back up again so guys can see that. And don't forget, everybody, I will put a link to Undercover, a Novel of Life. And I tell you what, it's a real page turner. So we just scratched the surface of what's in that book. So if you want to know more than you could ever begin to know about how the cartels work, why, get that book and read it. So it's a real readable too. I read a review of it, and they said it was a memoir of his life that was really exceedingly readable. So we all like that. I really appreciate you coming on. Folks, don't forget, hit me up on Venmo, buy me a cup of coffee or a shot in a beer at Gangland Wire, or make a donation on my podcast on the website. And don't forget, I've been forgetting, I haven't talked about the PTSD. Especially if you're veterans and you have a problem with PTSD, get hold of your local VA. They've got a website that's set up for that and a number, and I don't have that on me right now, but that's all you got to do is Google PTSD and the VA, and you'll find that help. Keith, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay.